Yeah, yeah, it's true. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by, taking a look at my video. So I have a first for my channel. I have shown women, professional women chess players before, but I have not shown a Wesley So versus any woman before that I know of, unless I'm tripping. I don't think so. No. So this is the first time for that. So I do have the the Hou Yifan versus Wesley So game taken for round 14, if I'm not mistaken. If I didn't forget in like 2 minutes. Yes, so for those of you who are not familiar with Hou Yifan, she became the world champion in 2010 at the age of 16. So, that's kind of crazy. Like, usually, people get into their 20s before they start becoming world champion and stuff. At least that's traditionally how it's been. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's the youngest world champion ever out of men and women, just period. That's a crazy age to be a world champion. It's insane. So anyway, I do have that game for you. Round 14, Hou Yifan, Wesley So. Follow my people in the Philippines. Mabuhay, kamusta na? Masaya kong makinig kang muli ang masaw tayo. Ingat lagi, mabuting pagbati. Everything, all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys very much for coming by, taking a look at my stuff. For anybody who is coming from China, I will say ni hao and shishini. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got, I just literally was about to do this and I didn't do it. Okay, put my volume up. So we got e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, knight coming to f6. So we do have the Berlin defense. Now, for those of you that watched my video yesterday, my latest video, it's going to bear some similarities for you guys. If you guys caught that. If not, it's not going to, but there's still going to be some nice ideas in it. We do see castles by white. Knight takes e4, rook to e1. Knight coming to d6. I'm kind of jumping through this a little quick because, this is all very standard stuff. The knight comes to d6. We see knight taking e5. And as you guys know, you're not going to be taking this bishop because you're going to be looking at this check right here. And it can get pretty nasty on the pins and the discovered attacks. So we do see bishop to e7. Bishop comes back to f1. We see knight taking e5, rook taking e5. Castles, we see d4. Bishop coming to f6, knocking that rook back. The rook comes back to e1. We see rook to e8, c3. Rook takes e1. Queen takes e1. We see knight back to e8. We see knight to d2. We see d5. And in the game that we saw yesterday with Anish Giri versus Wesley So, we saw knight coming to b3. But in this game, we do see knight to f3, which has been seen before. So we haven't gotten to the novelty yet. We see g6. Bishop coming to d3. Knight fianchettoing itself onto g7. Which is rare. This is like probably one of the rarest moves you ever see in the game. It's like a fianchetto knight. It's kind of interesting. But we got c6. Bishop coming to f4. Bishop coming to f5. And of course, we do have the knight on this g7 square. So we do have the ability after bishop takes f5 to take back with the knight. So we're not damaging our structure at all. We see queen coming to e2. We see knight back to g7. Rook coming to e1. And then now we do see the novelty of the game, which is queen to a5. Now, this is the true novelty of the game, but there is actually something I'm going to mention later in the video about the novelty. It's a really interesting situation that comes up a little bit later. So stick around for that. So we do see a3, just trying to make sure we defend this, undefended pawn here on a2. And then we do see rook coming to e8. And we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to stop the video and guess the move, there are actually 3 legitimate moves that you can make in this position. So see if you can stop the video and see if you can guess all 3 or 2 out of 3 or, any of them. So go ahead and do so. Okay, so for those of you that watched my video, Anish Giri versus Wesley So, you did see a very glorious, spectacular queen sacrifice on e8. Now, the thing I will say about this particular position is the reason why that queen sacrifice was so sound and so completely winning was because of the unique position of all of Black's pieces. You don't have quite the same setup in this particular situation, but if you did guess queen takes e8, you would actually get into a situation where after knight took e8, rook took e8, king to g7, bishop to d6, and then h5, the computer literally gives dead even for this position. So you would not be wrong. Now, I will say that I think as white, this would be very, very hard to play. So I honestly think that this would just like pretty much be a win for black, because you are not up that much material and you do have equal pawns. So I think even though the computer gives this as even, I think that this is something that is pretty much black's game to win. But like I said, if the computer played itself, it would literally draw this position. But as a human being, I think it would be very hard to play this as white. But if you did guess queen takes e8, you would be right. Also, another move after rook to e8, which is what we saw in the game, was actually bishop to e5. That was actually very legitimate as well, just kind of blocking that file. But the most accurate move was actually queen coming to d2, or even like queen coming down to d1, or even queen to c2. Those were the most correct, with queen to d2 being, most correct, because after you take with the rook, you do have the ability to take back with the queen and kind of take over the file. But all of those are legitimate guesses. So it wasn't like a one move fits all situation. You definitely, if you guessed any of the moves that I just mentioned, I mean, you would be, fairly correct. But like I said, I think that queen sacrifice would actually be much harder to play in this position than the position that we saw yesterday when Giri sacrificed his queen. So be careful with sacrificing your queen if it's not completely winning. But like I said, we did see bishop to e5. We see bishop takes e5, pawn takes e5. Of course, you don't want to take with the knight here because you're going to be looking at f6 and you're going to cry. Because I would cry if this was me. So after bishop takes e5, we do see pawn takes e5. Knight over to e6, we see queen to d2. We got rook to d8, knight coming to g5. We see an exchange on g5 with the knight. We see queen taking g5. We got rook over to e8. We see a rook left on e3. So we're trying to see if we can hit like maybe this little tender spot over here. Black does kind of have some weaknesses on the dark squares. Just because there aren't any bishops on the board. Kind of the same thing with white. I mean, they do have a little bit of like tenderness on this dark square, this diagonal, but it's not anything too crazy. So we do see queen to d8. We see h4. We got h5 coming. Queen coming to f4. We see c5, trying to see if we can create a nice little pass pawn over here. Because why not? We do see rook to d3. Queen comes to d7. We see queen over to g5. We see d4. Pawn takes d4. Pawn takes d4. And then we see queen to f6. Looking at maybe, possibly pushing here. Maybe taking this pawn. Or, just trying to, keep black as immobilized as possible. Because you see this king doesn't have like a lot of like areas to go to, and so we see queen down to d5. We see queen back to f4, placing a pretty direct threat on this pawn here. But we do take in the middle with queen takes e5, queen takes e5, rook takes e5, and rook takes d4. And of course, we're going to go ahead and, throw this this check down here because this moves the king over. If I'm not mistaken, if you were to just go rook immediately, maybe that is about the same thing. No, it might not be. Let me see. Check, come up. Yes, you do have the ability to defend in this position. And this is not what you see. So you do want to start off with that check. So the rook does check on e1 after king comes to h2. Now you have the move rook to e2, which gives a double attack. So that is a little bit different than actually giving white that extra tempo. So we see rook to b4, and then we do get a chance to snap on f2. So the king doesn't have the ability to kind of swing around and defend. So rook takes b7. We see a5. We got b4. Pawn takes b4. Rook takes b4. We have king down to g7. We see a4. We have rook to a2. And this is the position in the game that I was mentioning earlier. It is really, really interesting after the novelty of 22 moves ago. That if you actually... So what we saw in the game is actually king to g3. But in the database, it is showing that if you actually go king to g1 in this specific position, you will actually be snapping back into a game from 2001. And it actually started from a Sicilian. So we had a Berlin in this particular situation, and the other one started off with the Sicilian. And it was from 20 years ago. And like I said, if you did go king to g1, this position right here has been seen before. So it's just really kind of interesting how we have a novelty 22 moves ago, 23 moves ago. And if you actually make a certain move, so it's just like, that's a severe pattern swing around going on. So, backing up, like I said, we did see king to g3. We see f6. Rook comes up to b7 with check. We see king to h6. We see rook down to b4. Let me see here. I don't know. Maybe you have the ability to go rook a7 here and just try to push pawn. Maybe that wasn't an option. Maybe I'm missing something with that. I don't know. I'm just kind of winging that right there. So we see rook down to b4, just making sure that we protect the pawn again. We see rook to a3. King comes down to f2. We see rook to a2. King comes up to g3. Rook to a3 with check. King comes to f2. We see rook back to a2 with check. And then we do see king to g3 with check. And we do have a draw by threefold repetition. And let me just sidestep real quick on this, because this is a definite endgame concept. Like, what is wrong with doing this? Rook to a7. This is me just winging it right here, so I might be wrong. So, you know, feel free to comment if I'm wrong. But I feel like you can get behind this pawn and you can push this pawn up. And the king doesn't really have a good ability to hide away from a check here. He'd have to come back up here. So if you had this, maybe you have that there. I mean, that would be checking and stuff like that. But I mean, you can... I don't know, maybe it's you just kind of like, you're pretty much like getting into a position where you could try to create a pass pawn over here. Maybe that's the idea. I'm honestly, as I'm sitting here winging it, I'm honestly not sure why that's not playable. But it does show 000, so it must be, there must be some type of defense against it, but maybe I'm just missing it. Maybe I'm not super GM. Maybe I'm not a GM. Maybe I'm missing the in-game concept that's present in the position. So feel free, like I said, if you do understand exactly why rook to a7 cannot be played in that position and trying to press, you know, for some type of an advantage, feel free to comment. But I will be taking a look at it as soon as I get off this video to try to see, you know, if there's some type of, maybe it's losing. I don't know. Anyways, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. All of my people in the Philippines, let me try to get these good mornings rolling. So maanyong buntag, mayad na agahan, naimbag na biga, masantos ya kabason, marhe na aga, buenas dias, maanyong aga, mapia na uma, kapiang kapuno dios, mayab a abak, mayad na aga, mapia agay, mapia kapapita, may big abukla, maraja na buntag, maria may nat, Malpay na aga. And I feel like I missed one. No, I guess I didn't. Yeah, Malpay na aga kasanyangan si ilubi. Assalamu alaikum, salam to you. Appreciate you guys very much. Shishini for coming by and taking a look at my video. And I'll see y'all next time.